What if one quiet act of injustice could ignite a global movement? When Amara Collins, a black tech visionary, was wrongfully ejected from a luxury flight, she didn't just fight back, she rewrote the future of aviation. In a world still grappling with real cases of racial discrimination and corporate resistance, her story shattered billion-dollar empires and built something better from the ashes. Stay tuned as we uncover how one woman's quiet stand reshaped the sky itself. Amara Collins adjusted the strap of her carry-on bag as she stepped into the bright, humming terminal of oceanic air. She moved with quiet confidence, dressed in dark denim and a crisp linen blouse, her short, natural curls brushed neatly back. Nothing about her appearance was flashy, yet there was a subtle grace to her presence that turned heads. Beneath the surface, however, was a mind that had redefined industries, a woman whose influence threaded through critical infrastructure systems most companies depended on without even knowing. Gate 42 announced early boarding for first class and premier members. Amara approached, her boarding pass already pulled up on her phone. As she waited, she spotted a young father struggling with a stroller. Instinctively, she stepped forward, offering a hand. The small act earned a grateful smile, but just a few feet away, a sharp-eyed couple, Gregory and Marianne Sheffield, exchanged a glance laden with suspicion. In a society where implicit bias often operates unseen, Amara's gesture of kindness did not soften the edges of prejudice. Psychological patterns kicked in almost automatically. The Sheffields, embodying generations of unexamined privilege, tightened their grips on their possessions, crafting silent narratives in their minds about who belonged in luxury spaces and who did not. When Amara boarded and took her assigned first-class seat, a cascade of small aggressions unfolded. A flight attendant, pressed between corporate policies and subconscious biases, asked to check her boarding pass not once, but twice. The Sheffields murmured complaints to the cabin crew, painting Amara as agitated without any provocation. Their behavior reflected the deeper cultural scripts ingrained through years of media portrayal and societal conditioning, scripts where authority and wealth were expected to look a certain way, and where deviation invited scrutiny. What no one aboard Oceanic Flight 322 realized was that their assumptions were about to cost them more than comfort. Amara Collins wasn't just another passenger. She controlled the cybersecurity backbone that safeguarded Oceanic Air's entire fleet. And when the security guards arrived to escort her off the plane under the guise of passenger safety concerns, the clock on Oceanic's dominance began ticking down. This wasn't just a fight over one seat. It was the quiet start of a battle for systemic change, one that would leave no corner of the industry untouched. The walk through Pacific Coast International Airport was uneventful. Amara Collins kept her shoulders squared, her stride unhurried, even as security escorted her from Oceanic Flight 322. No argument, no scene, just quiet, practiced composure. But the smartphones raised discreetly by other passengers told a different story. In seconds, Amara's removal became more than an incident. It became content. By the time she reached the terminal's polished concourse, footage of her calm exit was already pulsing through social feeds. A simple caption under one of the first posts read, "Removed for existing while black." First class isn't first for all. Within an hour, hashtags like #right to fly and #justice for Amara trended across major platforms. Clips showed her offering to help a young father, juxtaposed against her silent, escorted departure. The contrast hit a nerve. Behind the virality lay deeper psychological undercurrents. Viewers weren't just reacting to injustice, they were responding to cognitive dissonance. The shock of seeing a poised, professional black woman treated as a threat in an environment that promised equality. Outrage boiled into organized anger. Influencers, civil rights groups, and even some travel bloggers joined the outcry. Within 6 hours, Pacific Standard News ran the headline, "When Safety Excuses Prejudice, Oceanic Air Under Fire." At Oceanic Air's corporate headquarters in Seattle, the mood shifted from irritation to panic. CEO Raymond Dalton, a sharp-featured executive known for his fondness for private aviation and hands-off leadership, initially brushed off the event as routine safety protocol. But his VP of Communications, Serena Malloy, warned him. This wasn't going away quietly. Serena knew the real threat wasn't just bad press. It was structural exposure. She had read the internal memos, the same ones quietly instructing staff to monitor passengers exhibiting non-standard behaviors, codes that disproportionately targeted Black and Latino travelers. Now, with the internet dissecting every corporate move, those policies risked coming into public view. While executives scrambled to control the narrative, Amara made one call from a quiet cafe tucked in the corner of the terminal. "Initiate full withdrawal," she said, her voice steady. Her private firm, Collins Strategic Systems, quietly held the cybersecurity contracts that protected Oceanic's aircraft, scheduling, and passenger information systems. In less than 24 hours, termination notices were dispatched to Oceanic's technology teams. The move stunned insiders. Oceanic relied heavily on Collins Strategic for real-time threat detection, international compliance data, and encryption protocols for flight systems. Without them, rerouting, maintenance schedules, and even booking infrastructure would begin to unravel within weeks. Worse still, early investors learned that Collins Strategic also controlled silent funding lines critical to Oceanic's liquidity. Raymond Dalton's CFO delivered the news with a pale face. $3.6 billion in investment support was vaporizing. Simultaneously, former Oceanic employees emboldened by Amara's story started speaking out anonymously. Accounts flooded online forums and independent news outlets. Stories of being denied promotions, random security checks, and reprimands for minor infractions became public record. Independent journalists unearthed internal training materials that encouraged gate agents to flag urban attire and accented English among passengers. The language was unmistakably coded. The scandal escalated with every refresh of a feed. Cultural and political tensions, already heightened by recent discrimination, lawsuits in real-world aviation, fueled the fire. Only weeks earlier, 8 Black men had filed a lawsuit against a major U.S. airline, alleging they were ejected from a flight solely based on a white flight attendant's complaint. That case had already reignited national debate about flying while Black. Amara's story added gasoline to the blaze. As evening fell, Serena advised Raymond to issue a proactive apology. Not a corporate memo, a personal visible statement acknowledging the incident and promising independent review. Raymond refused. He demanded they stand by our people. His words betrayed a generational arrogance, the belief that the old playbook of silence, spin, and attrition would work. They miscalculated. That night, a well-known tech analyst posted a thread explaining how Oceanic's operations were vulnerable without Collins Strategic. Financial networks picked up the story. Oceanic Air's stock dropped 7% in after-hours trading. Inside a cramped apartment in Oakland, 27-year-old activist Noah James watched the news unfold. He tapped furiously on his laptop, organizing a boycott campaign. By midnight, a petition demanding accountability had over 500,000 signatures. TikTokers crafted clips overlaying footage of Amara's removal with statistics about racial disparities in air travel. Twitter Spaces, Reddit threads, and even airline review sites lit up with calls for action. Psychologically, the moment was primed for maximum impact. The injustice felt intimate. Viewers weren't just consuming a news story, they were participating in a movement. Back at Oceanic headquarters, executives huddled in emergency meetings. Their PR team rushed out a tepid statement. "We prioritize safety for all passengers and regret any misunderstanding." The backlash was immediate. "Misunderstanding," one viral tweet replied. "This wasn't miscommunication, this was prejudice." By morning, Oceanic faced a triple threat: public fury, technological collapse, and internal revolt. Junior staff, emboldened by the visibility of the scandal, leaked internal screenshots showing racially coded emails. Former employees confirmed long-standing issues of discrimination buried beneath corporate slogans about inclusion and diversity. In a desperate move, Raymond Dalton instructed legal teams to prepare defamation suits against major news outlets. Serena warned him. Going nuclear would only make them look more guilty. He didn't listen. By the end of the second day, news outlets reported that Oceanic's booking systems were glitching. Delays piled up nationwide. Financial analysts downgraded Oceanic's ratings to unstable, citing vulnerability from technological exposure and reputational collapse. Investor pressure mounted. Meanwhile, Amara Collins stayed quiet. She knew the psychology of power. Sometimes the most devastating move was no move at all, letting your opponents dig their own graves while the world watched. And the world was watching. Amara Collins moved like a shadow across the marble floors of her Manhattan office. From the towering glass windows, she could see the city stirring to life beneath a heavy morning sky. The media storm had swelled overnight, and she knew the second phase had to move faster than anyone at Oceanic Air could anticipate. In a private conference room, her core team waited. Marcus Vance, her longtime strategic advisor, scrolled through a live dashboard showing Oceanic's deteriorating financials. Shares had plummeted another 6% before the market even officially opened. Major travel agencies had begun quietly delisting Oceanic from their preferred carrier options. Public trust was disintegrating in real time. "We're ready," Marcus said simply. Amara nodded. She opened her tablet, revealing a series of confidential files, not leaked to the press yet, but soon. Whistleblower documents, settlement agreements. Oceanic had paid to silence complaints of racial profiling. Email chains where executives like Serena Malloy and her boss, Raymond Dalton, joked about passenger optics. It wasn't just incompetence anymore. It was proof of a toxic culture engineered to protect privilege and silence dissent. The first wave would be tactical. Anonymous packages were sent to major media outlets, each containing carefully curated evidence. Amara's legal team worked in tandem, filing regulatory complaints with the Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration, citing failure to maintain unbiased passenger practices, a direct violation of federal non-discrimination standards. At the same time, civil rights attorneys filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of affected Oceanic passengers and employees. It wasn't just about Amara's experience anymore. It was about everyone Oceanic had quietly mistreated, hidden behind layers of deniability. Meanwhile, Amara's tech operatives completed the final withdrawal of cybersecurity support. Without the proactive threat management her firm provided, Oceanic's systems buckled. Internal emails leaked showing frantic memos begging IT departments to manually monitor network security, a task far beyond their capacity. Rumors spread that sensitive passenger data might have been compromised. The public perception shift was immediate and brutal. By noon, headlines screamed across every news channel. Oceanic data breach suspected amidst discrimination scandal. On social media, prominent activists launched the Number Fly Fair movement, demanding systemic reforms in the aviation industry. Public anger wasn't just about one airline anymore. It was about an industry built on gatekeeping and unspoken hierarchies. Major celebrities lent their voices. A Grammy-winning artist posted a simple image of her torn-up Oceanic Air loyalty card with the caption, "We deserve better. Fly fair." The post amassed millions of likes within hours. Inside Oceanic's downtown Seattle headquarters, panic metastasized into chaos. Raymond Dalton, red-eyed and disheveled, slammed a hand against the boardroom table. "Get me the damn consultants," he barked. "Crisis management, brand rehab, whoever can fix this." But the consultants wouldn't save them. The problem wasn't just perception, it was substance. Within regulatory circles, pressure built. Lawmakers called for investigations into discriminatory practices across airlines, citing not only Oceanic but a pattern emerging industry-wide, emboldened by real-world lawsuits like the one currently gripping American Airlines. Senators demanded hearings. Advocacy groups petitioned for mandatory bias training for all airline staff, public reporting on passenger removals, and stronger civil rights protections in air travel. The blowback wasn't accidental. It was the culmination of years of mounting frustration finding its lightning rod. Through it all, Amara said little publicly. When Trevor Banks, a respected investigative journalist, requested an interview, Amara agreed, but with conditions. No staged sit-downs, no glossy PR footage, just raw, unfiltered truth. They met in a simple downtown cafe, cameras rolling discreetly in the background. Trevor asked the inevitable first question. "Some say you're destroying Oceanic Air out of revenge." Amara met his gaze calmly. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about consequence. When institutions treat dignity like a luxury item reserved for a few, they forget that sometimes the people they dismiss are the ones holding the real keys to their survival." The clip exploded online. It wasn't polished, it wasn't packaged. It was powerful. Viewers saw not a vengeful billionaire, but a woman embodying controlled fury and unwavering purpose. Someone who had faced injustice not by shouting into the void, but by reshaping the battlefield itself. Meanwhile, the economic pressure intensified. Oceanic's partnerships began unraveling. Credit card companies withdrew loyalty deals. Hotels cut package partnerships. Even logistics firms started quietly severing ties, worried about reputational spillover. By the end of the third day, Oceanic's stock had fallen 39%. Investors whispered about insolvency. Internal emails leaked showing board members discussing emergency mergers or bankruptcy protections, facing mounting lawsuits, regulatory probes, and catastrophic financial loss. Raymond Dalton's leadership fractured from within. During an emergency meeting, Serena Malloy finally broke ranks. She produced a recording, a private conversation from months earlier, in which Dalton dismissed bias training as PR window dressing and joked about keeping the riffraff in coach where they belong. The recording surfaced the next morning. National news networks played it on loop. Board members convened before dawn. By sunrise, Raymond Dalton was out, fired with immediate effect, a terse statement issued blaming his comments and leadership failures for recent events. But the damage was already done. Public trust had cratered. Employee morale was non-existent. Passengers canceled bookings en masse, refusing to associate with a brand now synonymous with racial exclusion and corporate arrogance. Meanwhile, at Collins Strategic's Manhattan offices, Amara and Marcus reviewed final transition plans. Their new venture, a boutique aviation technology firm focused on equity-first design, was nearly ready to launch. It would offer cybersecurity, booking systems, and operational software built with inclusivity and transparency as core principles. Major airlines, already crippled by public distrust, quietly approached her company, desperate for a fresh start. Amara understood what they needed. Not just better systems, a different ethos, a future where dignity wasn't negotiable. As she closed her tablet and gazed once more out at the city skyline, Amara allowed herself a rare, small smile. The fight wasn't over. It never really would be. But the rules had changed, and this time she had written them. Spring sunlight filtered through the soaring glass atrium of Liberty Terminal, casting long patterns across the polished floors. The buzz of anticipation was unmistakable. Hundreds of guests, reporters, investors, and former airline employees filled the space, their attention locked onto the sleek new aircraft stationed behind the stage. New Sky Airways was no longer an idea. It was a reality. Amara Collins stood just off stage, her tailored navy suit crisp against the backdrop of sky blue banners that read, "Everyone deserves a seat." Her vision had crystallized into something bigger than even she imagined during those tense days following her removal from oceanic air. This was more than a new airline. It was a redefinition of air travel itself. When she stepped to the podium, the room hushed. Cameras blinked to life. Across social media, thousands tuned into the live broadcast, eager to see what change looked like when built from scratch. "Good morning," Amara began, her voice steady. "3 months ago, I was forcibly removed from a flight not because of my actions, but because of others' perceptions of who belonged. Today, we begin rewriting that story, for every passenger who has ever felt unseen, unwelcome, or unheard." Applause erupted, echoing against the high ceilings. Behind Amara, images rotated on a massive digital wall, photos of diverse flight crews, engineers, ground staff, and executives. Real people who reflected the communities they served, not a curated corporate facade. New Sky's foundational principles were simple but radical in execution. First, a full-spectrum non-discrimination pledge embedded into every policy and practice, from boarding procedures to staff promotions. Every employee, from pilots to maintenance crews, would undergo comprehensive training on bias recognition, cultural competency, and conflict de-escalation, developed in partnership with civil rights organizations and aviation experts. Second, transparent reporting mechanisms. Every removal, complaint, or customer concern would be logged and reviewed by an independent oversight board. Quarterly public reports would ensure accountability. Third, technological integration rooted in ethics. Amara had overseen the development of proprietary AI systems that flagged inconsistencies in crew treatment, scheduling, and security checks, ensuring no demographic group faced disproportionate scrutiny or risk. Fourth, a pipeline for future aviation professionals. New Sky partnered with historically black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, and underfunded community colleges to create scholarship programs and training internships. It wasn't just about diversity. It was about access to opportunity at every level. Amara unveiled the New Sky Scholars Program, a $100 million investment in young pilots, engineers, and operations specialists from underrepresented backgrounds. "Our skies should reflect all of us," she said simply. "Not just a privileged few." The announcement drew thunderous applause, but Amara knew the real work lay ahead. Across the industry, traditional carriers scrambled to adjust. The fallout from Oceanic Air's collapse had triggered an avalanche of reform demands. Activists used Amara's momentum to push for broader Department of Transportation regulations mandating transparent passenger rights reporting, similar to what New Sky voluntarily adopted. Analysts speculated that new Sky Airways could disrupt established players within a year. Public trust had become currency, and New Sky held the market's full attention. In response, rival airlines issued tepid promises about renewed commitments to inclusion, but public skepticism remained high. Travelers wanted more than statements. They wanted proof. Meanwhile, booking numbers for New Sky's inaugural routes shattered projections. Families who once felt marginalized by premium travel marketing booked flights in record numbers. Business travelers, weary of corporate indifference, switched their loyalty. Even major corporations began revising their travel policies to prioritize carriers demonstrating measurable diversity and inclusion efforts. The first New Sky flight was scheduled for May, a symbolic journey from Birmingham to New York, linking two cities tied to the historical struggle for civil rights and progress. Among the inaugural passengers were former Oceanic employees who had resigned in protest during the scandal, now finding new purpose under Amara's leadership. Pilots who had been denied promotions elsewhere. Flight attendants who had faced retaliation for speaking up. Engineers sidelined because of accents or unfamiliar names. Now, they wore New Sky uniforms with quiet pride. As Amara toured the first fully branded New Sky aircraft, the NSY Freedom, she paused at the entranceway where a plaque was mounted. To every traveler told they didn't belong, "This sky is yours." The words weren't hers alone. They belonged to every person who had ever been made to feel small in a space built for dreams. Later, during a quieter moment, Amara stood with Marcus Vance near the edge of the terminal, watching as families posed for photos in front of the gleaming plane. "You did it," Marcus said, voice low and full of respect. Amara shook her head slightly. "We did it, and so did all the people who refused to stay silent." She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Change on this scale never was. Already, whispers circulated about competitors planning aggressive tactics, legislative lobbying to slow New Sky's expansion, and smear campaigns targeting her leadership. But Amara was prepared. She understood now better than ever that disruption wasn't a one-time act. It was a continuous process. It was battles fought not only in headlines but in boardrooms, hiring offices, and passenger cabins. Still, standing here, watching the first New Sky Airways jet prepare for its maiden flight, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It was the future unfolding on wings built from persistence, clarity, and an unshakable belief that dignity wasn't a privilege. It was a right. The engines of the NSY Freedom roared to life, carrying that belief into the open sky. The launch of New Sky Airways sent shockwaves through the aviation world, but it also drew out old adversaries from the shadows. Amara Collins knew better than to believe that change would come without resistance. She had disrupted a billion-dollar industry. She had embarrassed entrenched powers who had long operated without scrutiny. Now they were regrouping, and they wanted her legacy tarnished. The first attacks came subtly. Anonymous social media accounts began seeding doubts about New Sky's hiring practices. Some posts claimed the airline prioritized wokeness over safety, despite New Sky's rigorous training standards and transparent audits. Small blogs, later traced back to shell companies linked to rival airlines, accused Amara of fostering reverse discrimination, a familiar narrative that had gained traction in other industries facing backlash against diversity initiatives. Within days, the attacks escalated. An obscure online outlet published a misleading article claiming New Sky's AI systems endangered flight safety, citing unnamed aviation experts. What the article didn't mention was that the quoted sources had direct financial ties to lobbying groups fighting against bias reforms in transportation. Cable news panels, particularly on networks with ties to major airline advertisers, began inviting so-called industry veterans to critique Amara's vision. They painted New Sky's initiatives as reckless social experiments rather than necessary progress. One commentator went as far as to call New Sky an airborne social justice project doomed to crash. Amara refused to engage with every provocation. She understood the psychological tactics at play. Fear-based narratives, loss of safety, loss of tradition, loss of privilege, were powerful emotional triggers. Opponents weren't debating facts. They were fueling anxieties. Still, she knew silence had limits. At a carefully chosen moment, Amara authorized her team to release a series of fact-based counter-campaigns. The first video featured New Sky pilots, a diverse group of men and women, veterans and former commercial pilots, discussing the airline's enhanced training programs, safety certifications, and advanced technology. Calm, professional, and data-driven, the campaign undercut the fear narrative without ever appearing defensive. The second release was even more devastating. Investigative journalists uncovered that two major carriers opposing New Sky had, for years, quietly settled discrimination lawsuits involving Black, Latino, and Asian passengers. Some of the very executives criticizing Amara had signed off on those settlements. The expose ran across major outlets, reversing the momentum of the smear attempts. Meanwhile, grassroots support for New Sky only grew stronger. Former passengers, grateful for the dignity and transparency New Sky promised, flooded social media with positive testimonials. Hashtags like "Yeah, New Sky" and "Wings of Change" trended for weeks. Civil rights organizations highlighted New Sky as a model of corporate accountability and innovation. But Amara knew not every battle could be fought online. Behind closed doors, traditional airline lobbying groups pressured lawmakers to propose new regulations that would disproportionately impact smaller, newer carriers like New Sky. Clauses were inserted into transportation funding bills requiring reassessment of security technologies and adding layers of red tape under the guise of public safety. Amara anticipated these moves. Her legal team, working alongside advocacy groups, mobilized immediately. Public campaigns educated voters on how these proposed laws would entrench old systems and stifle competition. Transportation committees in Congress, already under scrutiny for their cozy ties to legacy carriers, faced mounting public pressure. The proposed restrictions stalled. Once again, transparency proved New Sky's greatest shield. In private moments, Amara reflected on the intensity of the opposition. It would have been easy to interpret it as a personal attack, but she recognized something deeper. These attacks weren't really about her. They were about defending a crumbling status quo. She thought about the recent lawsuit filed by Black passengers against a major airline, accusing it of racial bias in removals, a real-world echo of the very injustices she had challenged. The public's response to that lawsuit mirrored what she saw now: anger at injustice, but also growing fatigue with excuses. Amara knew the opposition wouldn't disappear overnight, but every smear, every attack, every desperate maneuver only confirmed what she already understood. Change wasn't just necessary, it was inevitable. A New Sky was the proof, soaring high above their reach. Across the financial world, the fall of Aero Sky unfolded like a slow-motion implosion. Once seen as a pillar of American aviation, the company now stood exposed, its gleaming image shattered by years of unchecked discrimination, systemic rot, and a failure to read the shifting currents of public expectation. Amara Collins watched it all unfold with a measured calm. It started with the regulatory investigations. The Department of Transportation, under mounting public pressure and fresh scrutiny from civil rights groups, launched a comprehensive probe into Aero Sky's passenger removal policies. Findings revealed a staggering pattern. Black and brown passengers were statistically far more likely to be flagged for security concerns or seat irregularities, echoes of the incident that had sparked Amara's journey. The data was damning. News anchors flashed graphics showing 10 years of complaints, settlements, and internal communications. Former employees stepped forward, some anonymously, others boldly, recounting how they had been instructed to keep premium cabins looking a certain way or flag travelers with non-traditional business attire. The public's outrage reignited overnight. Civil lawsuits flooded the courts. One particularly devastating class action combined over 200 former passengers and employees, alleging racial profiling, wrongful removals, hostile work environments, and retaliation against whistleblowers. Attorneys called it the largest civil rights action against an airline since the 1970s. Financial pressure mounted faster than even the most pessimistic analysts predicted. Major banks downgraded Aero Sky's credit rating. Suppliers renegotiated contracts or pulled out entirely. Travel agencies delisted them. Corporate clients shifted their travel budgets to carriers perceived as more equitable, often citing new Sky Airways as their new preferred partner. In response, Aero Sky's leadership flailed. Their interim CEO, Graham Foster, a safe pick installed after Raymond Dalton's removal, issued a public apology. He promised reforms, retraining, and a new commitment to restoring trust. But it was too little, too late. The apology backfired. Critics labeled it performative. Activists demanded more than words. They demanded accountability. When the Department of Justice, acting on whistleblower testimony and financial audits, executed a raid on Aero Sky's headquarters, the final cracks gave way. Federal agents seized documents proving top executives had known about discriminatory practices for years and had actively buried complaints to avoid public scandal. Worse, they uncovered evidence of financial misconduct, settlements paid through off-book accounts, lobbying funds illegally funneled to political figures to block regulatory reforms. The sight of agents carrying out boxes of evidence filled evening news broadcasts. And when Serena Malloy, the former head of operations, agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for immunity, Aero Sky's fate was sealed. Within weeks, the board of directors voted to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Aero Sky's remaining assets were put up for sale. Their prized international routes, their cargo division, even their once coveted loyalty program, all auctioned to competitors eager to strip the carcass clean. As news helicopters circled above Aero Sky's now half-empty headquarters, a striking image captured the public imagination. The company's iconic logo, a soaring silver bird, was being dismantled from the building's facade. Workers pulled it down piece by piece, the metal creaking against the crane cables. The footage went viral within hours. For millions, it became a powerful symbol, not just of corporate collapse, but of overdue justice. Amara did not celebrate. Victory, she understood, carried weight. Tens of thousands of Aero Sky employees, many of them innocent of the company's sins, faced uncertain futures. Ground crews, flight attendants, customer service representatives, people who had simply gone to work each day without ever touching the rot at the top. In interviews, Amara stressed this reality. "Our fight was never against workers," she explained to Trevor Banks during a follow-up documentary. "It was against a system that weaponized race, hid behind bureaucracy, and refused to evolve." That clarity mattered. It helped sustain public focus on reform rather than retribution. It kept the movement tied to principles of dignity, transparency, and structural change. not vengeance. Meanwhile, New Sky Airways soared. With each canceled Aero Sky booking, New Sky gained new customers. But more importantly, it gained trust. It became a standard bearer for what air travel could be when built around inclusion rather than exclusion. Regulators, now emboldened by public support, proposed sweeping changes to the aviation industry. Mandatory bias training for all flight staff. Public reporting of passenger removals by race and reason. Stronger protections for whistleblowers. Clearer accountability mechanisms when airlines violated civil rights standards. And through it all, Amara Collins remained steady. She continued to lead New Sky's expansion cautiously, refusing to gloat or rush. She poured resources into employee support programs, retraining initiatives for displaced workers, and collaborations with community groups advocating for equitable transportation. The collapse of Aero Sky sent a message far beyond airports and airlines. It showed what could happen when institutions clung to old prejudices, ignoring the reality that the world was changing, not someday, but right now. It showed that dignity could no longer be an afterthought. It showed that even systems once believed immovable could be made to fall. Amara Collins never needed to shout for justice. She let the truth, the data, and the will of the people do it for her. And in doing so, she made room for a new generation to rise, on wings built from courage, not exclusion. 5 years after that first fateful flight, Amara Collins stood quietly in the observation lounge of Liberty Terminal, watching a new generation take flight. Through the expansive windows, a New Sky Airways jet taxied toward the runway, its fuselage gleaming under the afternoon sun. The airline's logo, a stylized phoenix, now symbolized rebirth and resilience in the aviation world and beyond. Amara's reflection ghosted across the glass, a reminder that legacies weren't built overnight. They were shaped decision by decision, moment by moment, often when no one was watching. Her journey had never been about revenge. It had always been about creating space, real, lasting space, for those left behind by systems built to exclude. From the start, New Sky wasn't just a company. It was a movement. And now, the seeds planted were bearing fruit. Across the country, new programs modeled after New Sky's training academies were producing pilots, engineers, and leaders from communities once shut out of the industry. Airlines, airports, even transit systems had adopted transparency measures modeled after New Sky's accountability standards. Government policies, once sluggish and reactive, now required airlines to publicly report data on passenger treatment, pushing an entire sector toward fairness. In classrooms, mentorship programs funded by the Collins Equity Foundation inspired young minds to dream not just of flying, but of leading. Amara visited these schools often. She spoke not just about injustice, but about innovation, leadership, and the power of rewriting narratives when the old ones no longer served everyone. One story in particular stuck with her. A young girl in Memphis, no older than 8, stood up after a speech and asked, "Can I really be in charge of the sky too?" Amara had smiled and answered without hesitation, "You were always meant to." And that was the vision, not simply building an airline, not simply correcting a wrong, but changing what people believed was possible for themselves and their futures. Back at the terminal, an announcement echoed over the speakers. Final boarding call for New Sky Flight 187 to Johannesburg. The flight was part of New Sky's global expansion, new routes connecting underserved regions, creating pathways for commerce, education, and exchange in ways that older airlines had neglected for decades. Amara watched as passengers of every background lined up. No fear, no second glances, no assumptions. Just people traveling. Freely. Finally. As the plane lifted into the sky, Amara felt no need for speeches or headlines. The legacy was already in motion, carried forward by every soul who dared to believe the sky belonged to them too. And it always had.